Hello, everyone, and good evening. We are excited to have you all join us tonight. We are delighted to have with us a very special guest, Professor and the Reverend Dr. Stephen J. Nelson, who is a 1972 HIU graduate. We are so proud of him. Tonight, he will focus on the challenges and opportunities facing colleges and universities today. Just a little bit about Professor Nelson, if you haven't had a chance to read up on him already. Stephen J. Nelson is Professor of Education and Educational Leadership at Bridgewater State University and a Senior Scholar in the Leadership Alliance at Brown University. At Bridgewater, he teaches graduate students in both Masters and C.A.G.S. education programs in educational leadership. He is the author of 8 books about the College Presidency and the history of the college and university, including his most recent Searching the Soul of the College and University in America, Religious and Democratic Covenants and Controversies, released in fall 2023. And previous to that, John G. Kemeny and Dartmouth College, The Man, the Times, and the College Presidency in 2019. The Shape and Shaping of the College and University in America, A Lively Experiment in 2016. And Decades of Chaos and Revolution, Showdowns for College Presidents in 2014. He holds a Ph.D. from the University of Connecticut in higher education and the history and philosophy of higher education, a Master of Divinity from Andover Newton Theological School, and a Masters of Arts in Religious Studies from the Hartford International University for Religion and Peace, formerly Hartford Seminary, and a Bachelor of Arts in History from Gettysburg College. Prior to his tenure as teacher and researcher, Professor Nelson worked for nearly 20 years as a student affairs administrator at Wellesley, Dartmouth, and Bard colleges. Professor Nelson is also an ordained minister in the United Church of Christ. A fellow peer. So proud to have you. Looking forward to this conversation. And just to let you know that the HIU Alumni Council is excited to launch this first What's Next series. And a little bit about it. We see that fall is back to school time. It's also a great time to consider what's next professionally. So we invite you to join HIU alums to explore some options. Maybe there's a book in you waiting to be written. Chaplaincy certification or getting published in a journal may appeal to you. Maybe there's a religious leader seeking opportunities to hone your skills to serve the communities you lead. One of these free virtual conversations may launch you into a new pursuit. Join us for inspiration and conversation. The upcoming What's Next options include Tuesday, October 8th from 7 to 8 p.m. Eastern Time, chaplaincy certification, or getting published. Obtaining Board of Chaplain certification for chaplains and ACPE certified educators. And that will be led by Chaplain Jawad Bayat, and we're very excited to have him as part of our board, alumni board. Also, we will have Professor Lucinda Mosier. She will discuss getting published in a professional journal, so that's very exciting. And the event after that will take place on Thursday, November 7th from 12:15 to 1:15 p.m. And the question we ask is is a demon for you? Why and how to pursue a demon? And Professor Allison Norton will lead us in that discussion. So as you see, we have a lot of exciting things coming, and we have even more in the new year, so stay tuned. We are now excited to hear from the person who is with us tonight, Professor Nelson, who just simply asked so humbly to be called Steve, even though he has so many other titles we can call him by. And so we now invite Steve to begin.
Thank you very much for the kind and generous introduction, and to your colleagues there, Susan, Sheila, and Joe, appreciation for the logistics of getting this arranged. I began to scare myself the other day because I realized that it was 50 years ago, about last week, that I drove to Hartford from Philadelphia to start my Master of Arts in Religious Studies at the then Hartford Seminary Foundation. I hadn't visited the campus prior. Old-fashioned maps and whatnot got me into West Hartford, and I drove somewhere to some building and then got to my residence hall, and there began a 2.5-year trek for the Master of Arts in Religious Studies. I'm enormously indebted to many, many people along the way, but I need to mention my advisor at Hartford, a man by the name of Leroy Moore, who I believe is still alive. Last I knew was living in Colorado. And I wouldn't be where I am if I hadn't had Leroy Moore as my advisor in my thesis and other classwork at Hartford. He was a tough taskmaster in some ways, but not super old-fashioned. And if I remember correctly, his advisor for his doctoral dissertation was Sidney Mead. So he came from incredible lineage in terms of what he then was passing on, and really introduced me to Mead. I didn't know that Mead existed prior to Leroy. So I'm terribly indebted to him. Gettysburg is where my foundation was academically. It was work at Gettysburg that got the seed planted of interest in religion. I had no idea what I was going to put together when I came to Hartford, but very quickly, and probably through introduction to Leroy Moore, it was going to be American religious history, was going to become my master's specialty. This book that I'm presenting on tonight, in a lot of ways, is almost, it's kind of a biographical statement of me, because it's everything that I have tried to do in my life put together in a book that is an academic scholarly book. But absent any of those platforms, I wouldn't have been able to do it. And you can see even in the title, you know, it really is a kind of Sidney Mead. There is the religion of the Republic. I don't name the religion of the Republic in the title, but that's what it is. And that's what Mead called the civil religion. He preferred that term to the civil religion, but that's really what religious and democratic covenants and controversies is really all about, in my mind. So what I'm going to try to do here, and I know the witching hour is officially 8:30, so I'm going to be kind of shooting for that for sure. I'm not going to talk that long, okay? One of my watchwords that I say to my students is, don't tell me what I know, tell me something that I don't know. Now, I'm probably going to violate that and tell folks things that they already know. And some of them are kind of like obvious. But I'm going to be pressing to try to put over your transom things that you don't know, or that you haven't thought about, or that you haven't connected in a certain kind of way. The way I'm going to do that is kind of multifaceted. This is going to be a kind of traditional talk. This ain't PowerPoint. This is me speaking, lecturing, but I hope for only something in the order of about 20 minutes. Maybe it'll be a little bit longer. But if anybody's got a comment or question, because something that I said didn't make sense or the connection wasn't there, please feel free. I mean, we've got 30 or so people in the room, and Susan may help bail me out by being able to see hands and whatnot. But if you've got something to say, given 30 is a lot of people, or 35, but feel free to unmute and make a comment, ask a question as I'm going, okay? So that's kind of the ground rules. What I want to do is sort of give you a large kind of arc of what I've tried to do in this book. And the arc has a couple of pieces in it, probably. Underneath that are going to be what I would call sort of some touchstone moments in the history of the college and university in this, it's coming on 400 years. Harvard University will celebrate its 400th anniversary 8 years from now, okay? Or pardon me, 12 years from now, in 2036. So we're getting to the 400-year point in terms of the college in America. But I also am going to feature what I consider to be kind of bellwether historical figures along the way, people that I think are incredibly influential on the college and university, but particularly this issue of what is the soul of the college and university in America. Some of them are long ago folks, and some of them are relatively contemporaneous. So I've got, a handful, there are many more, but a handful of folks that I want to try to underscore along the lines tonight that are what I consider sort of bellwether, major impact figures. One of them, interestingly, is Kemeny, who was referenced earlier and about whom I've written a biography. And I'll say more about Kemeny much later. So where are we? Have been taken since my work at Hartford in the religion of the Republic. This book really is sparked by a kind of offhand comment that I made in my dissertation and appeared in my first book that was based on the dissertation, that interestingly, a very, very tough cookie advisor who I should mention, William Jellema, sadly now deceased, who was my advisor at UConn, in a sense, let go. He would often catch this kind of thing, but in a kind of offhand way in the dissertation, I made a remark that I thought that maybe there was a religion of the college and university that paralleled and mirrored the religion of the Republic of the nation. I've often described that as kind of a sea running underneath this larger thing, that here's the sea of the religion of the college and university that is like unto the religion of the Republic, that I think is the canopy for the nation of America. So that's where this whole trek that got me into this book, got me into a lot of my other work, is tripped off from. In many ways, the argument that I'm making is very simple, but it's also enormously complex. So, the book is longer than I had actually thought it was going to be. It's not a tome. This is not Perry Miller, but it's pretty damn long. And I worked hard even to keep it shorter. So what happened in this country? Shorthand. Mass Bay, Virginia colony, Maryland, Philadelphia area. That's where the settlers from the quote unquote old world came from, mostly England and other European countries. I would argue that the roots of what became the Republic, and I have a very, very dear friend who's on the faculty at Wellesley College, who I went to high school with, Stephen Marini. And Steve has been a backboard for me with a lot of my shaping of my books. And when Steve and I first met to talk about this book, he said, well, just be careful because the Republic didn't become a republic until the constitutional era. So you can sort of talk about the ideals and the values of the Republic, but you can't really talk about the religion of the Republic before there was a republic. Steve is right, but there are all manner of principles, beliefs, ideals that were part of for about 160 years, from 1619, 1618, whatever you want to mark as when the first settlers came, to 1776, 1787, and so forth, and the founding of quote unquote America. So that's what we are. Much more diverse, I would argue, theologies, practices, and beliefs than people sometimes think. Some people think that America was a theocracy. There were aspects of it that were, but there were a lot of aspects of it that weren't. And the diversity of both religious voices, but also we need to remember non-believers. There were non-believers in the 1620s who came to America. There were people fleeing religious intolerance in various places in Europe, but there were also non-believers fleeing some of that same intolerance because some of that was coming down on them. And interesting, I want to talk a little bit about Roger Williams. Roger Williams was his notion of religious conscience, believers and non-believers. So it was everybody's got a religious conscience, but you don't have to be a believer to have a conscience and then to have religious liberty and religious freedom in terms of the freedom not to believe. The freedom to have no belief was part of Roger Williams. So we get lost sometimes. I've been, you could hoist me on my own petard because I've done it probably often in my own work and talking, that this country at the get-go was actually ironically less religious. It was very religious, but it wasn't wholly religious and it wasn't one kind of religion. Yes, it was broadly Protestant, but very early on it included Catholics. Early on it included Jewish folks. It included black slaves. And it included non-believers. So that's the environment of America. So no big shock. The academy in America, the college and university in America springs out of that. Harvard in 1636, not quite 20 years had they been in Mass Bay, is very much a kind of congregational, Puritan sort of place. That's true. And yes, it was dedicated to developing ministers because the thought was we need to have ministers that will fill the pipeline when the current ministers die. But Harvard, even in 1636, was also there to prepare people in other ways educationally to be leaders in the society. So that really was from the get-go. Now, Roger Williams. I sit here tonight in Providence, and less than a mile, as the crow flies that way, is the First Baptist Church of America. That was the church that Roger Williams founded, not that physical plant, but that was the church that Roger Williams founded when he was exiled, forced out of the Mass Bay colony. I won't ask anybody to chime in here, but it's always a fun game. When was Roger Williams thrown out, along with Ann Hutchinson and others, out of the Mass Bay Colony. 1632. Some people think 1631. So 4 years before Harvard is founded, the Mass Bay Colony is saying, we can't tolerate you. We all came here for freedom from those folks over there. And we're already saying to you, get out of here, or maybe your life. Fortunately, it was only 50 miles and less than that to get over the border to the then Providence plantations. Okay. And yes, indeed, sadly, plantations, slaves, okay, became Rhode Island. Roger Williams came from Mass Bay in 1632 to Rhode Island because he was forced out by those folks. And that was where Roger Williams then began to exert his voice of religious freedom and religious liberty. Where does that go? 150 years or so later, First Amendment. And I can argue in the academy, academic liberty and academic freedom and free speech in the academy is Roger Williams. It's right there. It's a through line. Roger Williams to what we come to believe is freedom of speech in the academy, not in the country, in the college and university. So that's where this whole business of these values and principles that Marini was right, are not yet the religion of the Republic, but that's what became the religion of the Republic. There is Roger Williams. You know, he didn't found it down the street here on North Main Street in Providence then, but he founded the First Baptist Church in America. And you're going to hear more about that in a little while as well. I'm teasing things, but for sure. So there's Roger Williams, I believe one of the bellwethers. Jumping a bit ahead, another major touchstone bellwether in my mind. And interestingly, I guess whether you debate or whether he had a high school education, certainly didn't have a college education, was Abraham Lincoln. I found over and over again in researching this book that a lot of stuff came back to Lincoln and Lincoln's way, if you will, of being a theologian of the religion of the Republic. He's probably, other than maybe Jefferson, and all sorts of baggage there, I understand and know that, okay, that we can talk about if anybody wants to. Less baggage with Lincoln on the racial issue, but Lincoln was not the purest guy either, okay? But Lincoln was the guy who basically, there's the 20 Civil War that you can argue was absolutely seated in the foundation of the country. That it wasn't a question of whether we would have a civil war, it was when. We could have had it maybe 20 or 30 years before we did. We could have had it 20 or 30 years later. We would have had a civil war. And we did. And Lincoln was the theologian. That's where his second inaugural, and that's where the Emancipation Proclamation. What's Lincoln trying to do? Let's not point fingers at each other. Let's accept the Confederate people who caused the Civil War and bring them back into the fold, which unfortunately, because of Lincoln's assassination, didn't happen. But Lincoln is another touchstone figure who's kind of shot through this book in a variety of ways. And I kept coming back. It's like you're looking at the colonial era, but you can't help but avoid the Civil War. You're in 1950. You can't help but look back. You're looking at the civil rights movement in the mid-late 50s, Martin Luther King. You can't help but look back to Lincoln and the Civil War. So there is another touchstone figure. Another touchstone figure to me, not thought of, a lot of people don't know about, introduced to me by Professor Jellema, a man by the name of Minogue. Minogue was a British economist. He wrote his major book, The Concept of the University, in, I think it was 1970 or 1971. It was basically a neocon economist in England looking at what was going on worldwide on campuses in that time. Minogue basically, and I'm really being reductionistic here, basically said, we've got to let the university be the university. If the university becomes just another political party, another do-good social agency, or something like that, it's no longer the university. And that argument I can take very much to the present, if anybody wants to do it in discussion. And not just in the last 11 months, since the Hamas attack, the last 40, 50, 60, 70 years or longer. And again, I think a through line that started in the 1630s with the founding of Harvard. So Minogue was onto something very, very important, and that is the college or the university needs to be the university or the college. It can't just be some political party or some ideological something or other that is pursuing some cause, because otherwise it's no longer the university. And embedded in that is the notion that we're about free inquiry, we're about research, we're about thinking, we're about intellectual debate and dialogue, not litmus tests on one side or the other. For you're either a good guy or gal and you're in here, or you're a bad guy or gal and you're out of here. So Minogue is another, very, very key figure in my mind. And his book, I think, really needs more people reading it. Now, how am I doing on time? Not too bad, but I'm going to get to a wrap and then see where folks want to go with what I've lined out. I came to find, and again, you may think you're telling me something that I already know. In the history of this country, sadly, the major wars, there are other events too, but the major wars that we have been engaged in have often been places where there has been some turning point, and that's both been for the nation, but it's also been in the academy. And so, I would start, although there were other small wars prior, the Revolutionary War, the War of 1812, a little bit less of an impact, but some. The Civil War, for sure. And one of the little anecdotes that I have uncovered in the course of my research, I think I talk about it in this book, if not elsewhere. In the run-up to the Civil War and in the Civil War, during the Civil War, there were the sons, and they were mostly sons. I don't think Radcliffe was founded yet, but if it was, sons and daughters of Confederate soldiers rooming together at Harvard with the sons of Union soldiers during the Civil War. In other words, my dad's fighting here, your dad's fighting there, we're roommates. So the notion of, can we talk? Do we have to talk? Maybe we avoid each other, but we're roommates. And the Civil War is going on, and we're in college. So the Civil War becomes this major moment for the country. Where were we going to continue to exist or not? And we managed to make our way through that, but not perfectly by any means. We are still fighting battles of the Civil War, spillovers from what wasn't done even on the backside of the Civil War, let alone what was not done in the constitutional period, let alone what was not done in the civil rights movement of the 50s and 60s. We are still refighting. The other night, there was a rebattle between two presidential candidates of stuff from the civil rights movement. That wasn't name by name, almost, but sadly, we are still fighting those same wars. World War I, World War II, Korean War a little less, Vietnam gigantically, war on terror. You know, we just celebrated the 23rd anniversary of 9/11. The war on terror that we have had off and on, depending on who the president was, for the last almost quarter of a century. Enormous blowback and discussion and spinoff in the academy, inside the gates of the college and university. Then other major movements for sure outside of wars. First and Second Great Awakening, social gospel era, really rebounds of the social gospel era in the early 20th century. And then, you know, moral majority and some of that stuff in the mid-late 20th century. And again, even if not by name, still continuing on today. And again, all those things that I'm mentioning, they've got effects on what's going on in the culture, what's going on in the academic life, what's going on in the free speech and academic freedom and academic liberty within the college and university. And look, I'm a product of the 60s. I think we did a lot of things decently as students in the 60s, but there was a lot of stuff we did really badly in the 60s, and that a price was paid for, frankly, because of stupidities that we engaged in the 1960s. So yes, as a culture and as what is the soul of the college and university in America, very Protestant for a long period of time. Christian then, as Catholics began to sort of be seen as a group that was part of who were the Christians in the country. And they were here for a long time. And their voices took a long time to be felt a little bit more than, hey, everybody's Protestant. No, everybody wasn't Protestant. And there were Jewish folks all the time. My wife led me to Washington's talk in the synagogue down in Newport as he'd been elected president. He hadn't been inaugurated. And Washington is going into a synagogue and he's basically saying, we are all Americans. I mean, that's basically if I were to reduce his talk to the synagogue of Truro, that's what Washington was saying. So those folks have always been with us. Probably Will Herberg in the early 1950s with Protestant, Catholic, and Jew, it became more, okay, we're Protestant, Catholic, and Jew. I would argue now we're some kind of, nobody's got a really good name for it, but we're sort of a multifaceted, multi-religious cultural nation today. Some people would say it's basically the Abrahamic tradition, but it's really more than that. And again, we've always got to remember, if we're Roger Williams folks, it's non-believers as well as believers. So whatever label we put on it, it's other people as well. I have to watch my voice. That's when the whole deal will collapse, when my voice can't go. A couple of other things very briefly, and then I want to take questions and see where folks want to take things. John Witherspoon, president of Princeton University, a Scottish immigrant, is brought to this country to be the president of Princeton University, the only college president who signed the Constitution. He's been here less than 30 years, and he's a signatory to the Constitution. And what does he do at Princeton? What Princeton has to be about is getting leaders prepared for the republic that even when he was over in Scotland, he could see was coming. America was going to declare its independence. And as it did, and he's the president of Princeton, he's basically saying Princeton, as part of its mission, needs to raise up leaders who can lead this thing down the road. So the notion of critic and servant, the academy is critic and servant of that nation, certainly preceded Witherspoon, but it was absolutely shot through Witherspoon. Another marker, another one of my bellwether people, William Jewett Tucker, actually president of Andover Newton, or dean of Andover Newton, whatever it was called, and then an alumnus of Dartmouth College, becomes the president of Dartmouth College in the 1890s. He's a social gospel guy. And he used the term, which I absolutely love, and there were some precursors of this, academic religion. So a social gospel congregationalist, William Jewett Tucker, in the 1890s is basically preaching a social gospel leadership of Dartmouth College, that he coined the term academic religion. And that was, what is it that we're doing in our academic work here, our curricular work here, that is preparing people to go out? The Tucker Foundation at Dartmouth was named by John Sloan Dickey, who was successor to removed from Tucker in the late 1940s and early 1950s, when John Sloan Dickey, in the Atlantic Monthly, an essay, you can go online tonight and pick it up. It's a classic, essentially conscience and competence in the college. The college has to have both competence. We have to be educating and teaching for competence, but we also have to be educating for conscience. Because competence without conscience, we know where that ends up, okay? Now, I'm gonna give you a couple of, I would never do a book reading, okay? But I wanna close my formal remarks with just one or two things that are of note, and I will find them of note. John Kemeny, who I've written a biography about, and I've got to put on my reading glasses because it's a small footnote in the book. John Kemeny was president of Dartmouth College, 1970 to 1981. He gave his essentially valedictory, his farewell valedictory address in the spring. I was actually there because I was working at Dartmouth at the time, of 1981. So here's John Kemeny. So this is only about 50 years ago, okay? And to the issue of the soul of the college university. He says, during the years to come, many voices will speak to you, voices that will clamor for your attention to tell you what you should do with your life. Among these voices will be a voice heard in many guises throughout history, which is the most dangerous voice you will ever hear. It appeals to the basest instincts in all of us. It appeals to human prejudice. It tries to divide by setting whites against blacks, Christians against Jews, by setting men against women. And if it succeeds in dividing us from our fellow human beings, it will impose an evil and fragmented society on us. He goes on with a comment or two from that in concluding that conversation. You could add Muslims to the Jews against Christians. You could maybe add other minority groups to blacks against whites, but that's John Kemeny in 1981, actually 40 some odd years ago. So the notion of what was going on. People think the college lost its soul. I would argue there's Kemeny from a public pulpit in 1981. And what he's doing, you could take those words and you could put them on any college campus graduation platform last spring, and they would be equally applicable and maybe more so today than they were when he spoke them. And then, my spouse is not in the house. I've got a really interesting quote from Minogue that I'm not going to bore you with, but I want to find what I wrote about Brown's baccalaureate. So this is contemporaneous. So this has been going on before my wife became the chaplain of the University of Brown. But this is what I write. This isn't her. So this is in the book. So this is where you get the book reading. So nearly 1,500 undergraduate students are packed into the pews of the First Baptist Church in America. As the name implies, the First Baptist congregation gathered in the country by Roger Williams in 1636. He had, 4 years after he came here from Mass Bay, as I said earlier. The church's architecture is classic New England setting in Providence, Rhode Island. White clappered outside large windows, a confined and raised pulpit in a smallish chancel area, and a main floor and balcony filled with pews. That's where the 1,500 graduates of Brown go for their baccalaureate service. The American flag and that of the Baptist Church are on poles on either side of the pulpit. The occasion is Brown's baccalaureate, held every year on commencement weekend in the building established and completed in 1775, quote, for the holding of Brown's commencement and the public worship of Almighty God. The service and the liturgy are the creation of Brown's chaplain, Janet Cooper Nelson, who began fashioning it, its present content, when she arrived in 1990. After instrumental, I'll cut to the chase here. So all the instrumental preludes and whatnot, baccalaureate speaker is up there in the pulpit. The meeting house, as it is called, is the seat of religious liberty in the country. The first voice in the service from the pulpit is a student who utters the Muslim call to prayer. I say in writing, from somewhere in the great beyond, Roger Williams utters quietly and reverently, bravo and thanks. So that's where I want to stop the formal remarks. There are other things that I could say, but I need to hear from you folks about whether any of that is making sense. What more do you want to hear from me that I can fill in the blanks? What are your opinions and thoughts? So the floor is open, and I went longer than I expected. And anybody who's in charge here who says 8:30 is the witching hour, we've got about 15 minutes.
Hi, Stephen. I'm just going to jump in here. Some of you know me. I'm Susan Schoenberger, Director of Communications at HIU. And first of all, thank you for your talk. And I feel like we just scratched the surface of what this book is doing. I did have to say that I think I may have mentioned this to you, but I was in the audience when Kemeny gave that speech in spring of 1981. I was
You did.
My freshman year at Dartmouth. So I do remember how he was revered. And of course he left right after my freshman year, but he was really quite a remarkable man. My question, and I hope other people have questions, but I wanted to get a sense of how the book is structured, and just how did you, I mean, obviously you can't cover 400 years of higher education in one book, but can you just give a little overview of how you took on this question?
Well, it's a really good question, Susan. I would only add, and I think I shared this with you, but part of the backstory of Kemeny in that quote is that the Dartmouth Review, which was the conservative, it was not a college organization. They were Dartmouth students funded by outside money, never recognized by the college, was started at the beginning of Kemeny's last year as president. And so part of that notion of the voices, he is echoing what kind of stuff the Dartmouth Review was throwing into the mix, but it was also what's out there outside our walls as well. I would only say, and Susan, I think, knows this, although they were graduating that day, who were founders of the Dartmouth Review? The major one that some of you may know of, Laura Ingraham, was on the Dartmouth Review and a Dartmouth grad. Some of you may not know the name of Dinesh D'Souza. Dinesh D'Souza was one of the founders of the Dartmouth Review. Laura Ingraham hasn't changed one iota since her graduation from Dartmouth. I knew her as an undergraduate. I had her in my office. I had the founder of the Dartmouth Review in my office on a number of occasions. So that's a piece, Susan, when you mentioned that exchange that we had. But broadly to your point, table of contents is table of contents. Religion in the college and university in America, landscape and saga. Religion, the Republic, and the American Enlightenment, which really parallels much the American Enlightenment sort of, there is how we got, the academic version of parts. A whole chapter on Witherspoon, who I think is one of the major features. The march to the Civil War, and what the watershed, march to the founding of the Republic and then to the Civil War. What I call the curses and blessings of religious and democratic pluralism in the 20th century. Boy, do we have curses and blessings built in to the country. And again, any of that stuff that we have in the country, trust me, if you haven't been in the college and university, that it's and sometimes magnified in the college and university. And then the whole business of the contemporary, what I call the ideological battleground. It's roughly chronological, but it's not completely chronological, because I will take a topic and run it maybe from Mass Bay and Harvard up to the founding of the Republic. And then I'll take some other topic and take it from mid-18th century to Civil War or to the 20th century. And then even some of the stuff that I do in the 20th and 21st century, sometimes I'm looking backward to essentially how did we get here? So here we are in the latter 20th century or the early 21st. Here are these roots back here that we need to be reminded of. I don't know whether that answers your good question, Susan.
Yeah, definitely. I would just love to. Okay, Jan Fuller, if you have a question, just do the hand raise and we'll because we need to unmute you. So go ahead, Jan.
Steva, thank you for this evening and for this book. We have here in your audience, first of all, I want you to tell Janet I sent my love. Tell her Jan Fuller sent love. But we have in the audience tonight a group of aspiring university chaplains.
Oh, really?
And I wonder if you would say to us, so I'm teaching the class and the students are here hidden. I wonder if you would say what the implications for chaplains are as we search for the best part, or to empower the best part of the soul of the university and to be part of that movement on campuses. What would you say to students preparing for chaplaincy today?
Oh, God. I
Well,
would say,
that's
oh, God. No, really good question. My wife could answer that better than I, but I will take a shot. The first thing, and Janet and I, we don't really argue on this point. Any chaplain to a university, even if they're not the dean of the chapel, so even a subsidiary, I'm the Muslim chaplain at Brown. I'm the Newman Center or the Catholic chaplain at Brown. You have got to be able to get outside your own place and understand other believers. And again, I would argue with Williams, not argue with Williams, take the Roger Williams, the non-believer. If the Muslim chaplain at Brown can't understand a non-believer at Brown and have that student in his or her office, God help us, okay? If they ignore that person or think that that person doesn't mean anything because they believe in nothing, I would argue God help us. If you're the chief, as Janet is, the chaplain, pardon me, this is Otis. If you're the chaplain of the university or the dean of the chapel or the chief, whatever they, various titles, dean of religious activities, or I really like Janet's title is the chaplain to the university. She is the head person, and the history of that position is only since probably mid-late 1940s. She had one very short-term predecessor and then a lengthy predecessor before her. As we know, it was often the president of the college functioned as the chaplain before there were chaplains. But to your question, I would say any person doing that work has got to understand the multi-religious nature of the place. And quite frankly, that again, in my mind, I conflate the university with the outside, what's outside the gates. There are more than Catholics outside the gates. There are more than Jews outside the gates. There are certainly more than Jews inside the gates. I'm being maybe a little bit flippant, but that would be my best answer to your goodly question. But boy, that's a whole seminar. I'd be happy to do that, and or Janet would be happy to do that with any collection of students who are thinking about or preparing academically to become chaplains, even if on a denominational sectarian basis. I want to be nothing other than a Jewish chaplain at a college. I want to be nothing other than a Buddhist chaplain at a college. Okay, fine. But again, let's educate you. I guess the bottom line there, Janet, is it really is a Minogue thing. If we forget that the university is the university loses itself. So if the university is only some religious faith, or worse, it's some political ideology, it's no longer the university. And if it's the university, then it's the free play of all manner of ideas, points of view, grounded, I would argue, in intellectual and academic and scholarly thinking and work, but also civil behavior. I didn't have time in the talk to mention, anybody want to go online and get this? John Sexton, president of New York University, 2004, I think in his first year as president of New York University, the university as sanctuary. He picks up being a Catholic, having studied actually for a while for the priesthood, he picks up the classic notion of a sanctuary, and he says, the university is a sanctuary. Yes, it is a walled off place. We will only let in people who will agree to our way of having civil discussion. If they won't agree to that, we won't let them in the door because they will just be disruptors. So any chaplain has to understand Sexton's notion of the university as a sanctuary. Does that get at what you're asking, Janet?
It does, and you could go on for a while, but I think that this particular class will totally appreciate and be right with you on that. And of course, we're just at the beginning of a whole semester.
Yeah.
So we're going to be talking about some of these things all term long. So, but
may I add to that? I can't hold back here. I'm a friend of Steve's. My background is I was an administrator at a public university, but before that, I'm a career Air Force officer. So dealing with chaplains in the Air Force, and so my perspective might be a little bit colored by that. But I see a chaplain at a university as having a dual role. One is that you're a listening ear and a counselor to all students. And then you're a leader of religious services for your particular denomination. But I think it's the really important role is to be available and respected and trusted by all students.
Michael, you've got it. And Mike and I go back, we were roommates at Gettysburg. So, but you're absolutely right. And that also goes back, I think, to Janet's question. Sure, a Jewish chaplain can't leave their Judaism behind, and they shouldn't be expected to. And they should be, pastoring and spiritually guiding that community. But the other point is their door should be open, and they should be able to hear out anybody who might want to knock on their door, or that is part of a campus set of dialogue or discussion. So the point's well taken, and it's lovely to see you.
So I think we're hitting our time. So if anyone needs to leave, you go right ahead. But I think if there's maybe one more question, we can get to it. Yeah, Sheila.
I put one in the chat. Oh, I'm echoing, but I put a question in the chat. If you could, for us, share what are some of the opportunities seen in colleges and universities today, based on this amazing history you've given us? What are some of the opportunities? We've seen some of the challenges, but how might we take what you've shared and move forward?
By opportunities, you mean for the college and university to make its footprint better known, or?
Yeah, I mean, I love all of the information you shared about the bellwethers and a lot of the quotes from the presidents. And some of them presented us with the challenges that we face. But I'm wondering what your thoughts are in terms of how we might see opportunities. For instance, I see that the challenge was that we didn't finish the fight, if you will, during some of those wars, but maybe there's an opportunity for us to continue it, if you will. Like, what are some opportunities that?
Well, really good question, Sheila. I think, again, I probably come back to Minogue and say that all of this would be within the context of the university, and that includes the college being the college. And I don't care whether that's a community college, a public university like Bridgewater State, a major public university like UMass or UConn or University of Michigan, or a major private like Columbia or Brown or, you know, fill in the blanks, okay? I would argue that scholarly, grounded intellectual, smart but not smart like we're the smartest people in the room, and the Dickey notion of competence and conscience is what the college and university can offer to, if you will, the country or any surrounding community. In other words, what can Brown offer, not just to Providence and Rhode Island, but across the country or around the world? And I would say producing the next generation. Brown refers to it in their charter as the rising generation. You know, so what can the college and university do for that rising generation? And there it is Witherspoon. It's critic and servant. It's the college and university as a critic of society. Hey, this isn't right. This isn't just. This isn't good. And as a servant, meaning we serve. We're here to serve. We're here to be teachers. We're here to go into the military. We're here to be lawyers. We're here, God love us, to be doctors, surgeons, or whatever. But having gotten that education, the root of education in the Latin is to lead out. So if you're getting an education, you know, commencing, what's commencement? Get out of here. Go on to the next place. We've had you here long enough. So I guess my response, Sheila, to your good question would be that the opportunity is keep educating, keep leading out, keep getting the next generation. And that doesn't mean forming them in some ideological litmus test way of thinking. It is, can they think? Can they broadly think? Do they have an intellectual grasp? But again, to to Dickey, an intellectual grasp that has ethics, morality, and conscience underneath it. And not just because, one of the Minogue quotes that I was going to throw out is Minogue has this great quote that the intellectual on the loose is the most dangerous thing that you can find. And what he means by that is somebody who's purely just an intellectual, but has no ethics, no morality, no grounding. They're just an intellectual. And then they're going to tell everybody what to believe or how to believe it. There again, I would say Roger Williams turning over in his grave. So that would, and that maybe echoes a little bit of what Janet was asking earlier about the chaplaincy question. It's got to be imbued with that stuff, I think.
Well, I think that's a great place to leave it. And thank you all so much. Thank you, Steve, for coming and for just giving us a sneak peek of what's in this book. So please go out and look for it.
I would be happy to have anybody get to me personally or whatever. And I would, not as a shameless plug, I believe the book makes an enormous statement. Is it the best thing ever written about religion and democracy in the college university? I don't know, but I will only leave you with this. Janet, my wife, Janet, often pressed me, well, what's your point? Where's this thing going? And I was not being disingenuous when I told her many times while I was researching this, I said, I don't know. And actually the parts of it that are in the 20th and 21st century, I had less of a thought of what I was going to find or what I was going to be able to say about the contemporary life in the college university than I did, because I felt pretty secure with some of the earlier stuff. But there it is. And I would say, read it. If it's more expensive than I wanted it to be because I have no control over that. But then get it interlibrary loan. Any good library can get it for you interlibrary loan. So
we will have it in our library. So if we don't already.
anybody wants a follow-up,
Yeah.
again, it's a blessing for me to be able to do this and to be with all of you this evening. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Have a good night, everyone.